September 1885, Salvation Ridge, Idaho. The sky hung low and heavy over the little hillside cemetery, the kind of gray that made you feel like the sun had given up. A cold wind moved through the dry grass, rattling the white wooden crosses as if they, too, were whispering about the widow in black. Mira Sutton, stood at the open grave, one hand cradling her swollen belly, the other clutching at the torn cuff of her dress. 7 months along, her back ached, her feet burned, and the child inside her turned restlessly as if it knew the world it was about to enter was already against them. At her feet lay the pine coffin that held what was left of Jacob Sutton, the miner who had loved her in his quiet way and then been crushed 3 days ago beneath a mountain of rock and greed. Pastor Edwin Whitlock snapped his Bible shut with a sound like a gavel. He cleared his throat, his voice thin and cold, as he turned to the gathered townsfolk. "Jacob Sutton has gone to meet his Maker," he said. "Now, brethren, we must address the earthly consequences he has left behind." He did not look at the grave when he said it. He looked at Mira. She raised her head slowly, eyes red, cheeks streaked with tears. "Consequences?" she whispered. "Pastor, I'm his wife. I'm carrying his child." From the back of the crowd someone snorted, "And half the winter's food supply, by the look of her." Laughter rippled through the mourners like a mean little wave. Out stepped Mrs. Cordelia Blackwood, thin as a whip and twice as cruel, veil pinned just so over her sharp face. "Jacob died owing my husband's mine $300, she announced. "No savings, no insurance, no assets beyond that shack of his." Her gaze slid over Mira's round body with open disgust. "And this burden." Mira tightened her arms around her belly. "We were going to pay. He just needed time. Please, ma'am, I have nowhere else to go." "The house will be seized to cover the debt," Mrs. Blackwood said. "You have 3 days to leave. After that, Salvation Ridge cannot support a useless, idle, overfed widow and her bastard-in-waiting." The word hit like a slap. "Ma'am, the child is Jacob's," Mira choked out. Pastor Whitlock's mouth curled. "Child or not, Sister Sutton, you have no means to provide. With your size, your condition, and your lack of skill, there is little honest work you can do. Perhaps the saloon on Front Street might find some use for you after dark. Drunk men are less particular." The crowd roared. Someone tossed a clod of dirt that burst against her skirt. Children chanted, high and shrill, "Fat sow! Fat sow!" as stones followed. Mira dropped to her knees beside the fresh-dug earth, curling over her belly, trying to shield the baby from the blows and the words. "Jacob," she sobbed, "you left me alone. What am I supposed to do?" And right there, if you were listening to this as a story by the fire or through a pair of worn headphones, I'd ask you, where in the world are you listening from? Which city? Which country? Because somewhere, someone knows exactly how it feels to be kicked when you're already down. A hoarse shout ripped through the laughter. "Lydia! Dear God, Lydia!" The crowd parted in a startled murmur. A giant of a man came striding up the hill, coat flapping, boots grinding dust. Broad shoulders, a wild brown beard, hair to his collar, eyes the fierce green of pine needles after rain. Caleb Bear Morrison, the mountain man folks whispered about, the widower who'd buried his wife Lydia and their stillborn child up in the sawtooths 5 years back and never come down the same. He stopped dead when he saw Mira, as if the earth had dropped out from under him. His face went white. He pushed past Pastor Whitlock, dropped to his knees in the dirt, and cupped Mira's tear-streaked face in his rough hands. "Lydia," he breathed, voice breaking, "I found you. You came back to me." Caleb lifted Mira as if she weighed nothing at all, though she was heavy with child and shaking with fear. His arms wrapped around her with a desperation so fierce she could feel it through his trembling. Her breath hitched, not from pain this time, but from the strangest, most bewildering sensation of being held as if she were precious. "You're alive," he whispered against her hair. "You're really alive." Mira swallowed hard. "Sir, you're mistaken. My name is—" But he didn't hear, or wouldn't. He lifted her onto the back of a massive chestnut horse, tucking blankets around her stomach, her legs, her shoulders, as if she were a fragile infant. Townsfolk stared as if witnessing a resurrection or a kidnapping, but none stepped forward, not even Pastor Whitlock, not even Mrs. Blackwood, especially not them. Caleb mounted behind Mira, one arm braced around her so she wouldn't fall. With the reins in his other hand, he turned the horse toward the road leading out of Salvation Ridge. Mrs. Blackwood shrieked from behind, "Morrison! She owes this town 300—" Caleb reached into his pack, grabbed a pouch, and flung it into the dirt at her feet. Gold coins spilled out like scattered teeth. "Keep your blood money," he growled. "She's coming home." Before they could gather their wits, he kicked the horse forward and galloped out of the cemetery. Mira clung to the saddle horn, heart pounding. The cold wind slapped tears sideways across her cheeks. "Please, please stop. I'm not Lydia. I'm—" Caleb pulled her closer, warming her back with the heat of his chest. "Hush now. You're safe. Nothing bad will touch you again." Safe. The word felt foreign, unreal, dangerous in its tenderness. The trail narrowed as they left the valley, weaving between towering pines. The further they rode, the quieter the world became. Snowy peaks loomed above them, glowing faintly under the autumn sun. Somewhere far below, a river whispered through the rocks. Hours passed. Whenever Mira shivered, Caleb shifted his coat and wrapped it around her. Whenever her back spasmed, he slowed the horse and let her breathe. Whenever her swollen ankles cramped, he lifted her down and massaged her feet with his bare hands, silent, gentle, reverent. "Lydia," he murmured once, his voice raw. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." Mira's heart clenched. She wasn't Lydia, but she didn't know how to say it in a way that wouldn't break him. When night fell, Caleb built a fire beside a stream. He laid out furs so thick they felt like clouds. He warmed stew in a little tin pot and held the spoon to Mira's lips as if she were too delicate to feed herself. Her cheeks burned. "I can do that." A soft smile tugged his mouth. "I know, but I missed taking care of you." He meant Lydia. He didn't see Mira at all, except sometimes he did. Like when she winced in pain and he looked at her belly, not with confusion, but with protective awe. "Your body remembers," he said quietly. "It remembers carrying life." The words soothed something deep and aching inside her. When the fire crackled low, Mira finally tried again. "Caleb, your wife." He froze. The flame danced in his green eyes, making them brighter, wilder. "If you say you're not her, I'll believe you think that's true, but I know what I see." His voice broke. "I buried her. I buried our baby. I built their crosses with my own hands. And then one day, God sent me back down that mountain, and I saw her standing in front of a grave crying." He took Mira's hands in his, holding them like sacred things. "Tell me that isn't a miracle." Mira didn't breathe. A miracle. He thought she was a miracle. No one, Not even Jacob had ever looked at her like that. Her throat tightened. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Caleb whispered. "You just have to come home." Home. The word echoed in her chest, warm and terrifying. They reached the foothills of the Sawtooth Mountains late on the third day. Caleb helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Ahead, half hidden among the pines, stood a sturdy cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a place built with grief, a place waiting for a ghost, a place about to receive a living woman instead. Caleb exhaled shakily. "Lydia, we're here?" Mira, exhausted, confused, terrified for herself and her unborn child, looked up at the man who carried her out of humiliation and into the mountains as if she were the most important thing he had ever seen. She whispered, "This is not my home." He touched her cheek, the gentlest touch she had felt in her life. "It will be," he said softly, "if you'll let it." The cabin stood on a rise overlooking a valley carved by glaciers long gone, its roof dark with age, its walls patched with thick logs Caleb had cut and stacked himself. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of pine sap and simmering broth. It should have felt welcoming, but just beyond the cabin, two wooden crosses stood in the frozen earth. Mira stopped walking. Her breath hitched. Her knees weakened. Her hand flew to her stomach as if protecting the child from what her eyes saw. Two graves, one marked Lydia Morrison, beloved wife. One marked Baby Morrison, never got to live. The air around them felt colder than the mountain wind. Caleb followed her gaze. His jaw tensed. Pain flickered across his face like a shadow passing over snow. "You don't need to be afraid," he murmured. "They rest. They don't haunt this place." But Mira wasn't afraid of ghosts. She was afraid of stepping into a life that wasn't hers. "Caleb," she whispered, "your wife, she really is gone." His eyes closed for a beat. "I know." "You said," he shook his head, "I know what I said, and I know what my heart told me the moment I saw you." He touched his chest, fingers curling into the worn fabric of his shirt. It wasn't logic, it was mercy. After 5 years of silence up here, seeing you felt like breath. Mira wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm not her." His gaze softened. "And yet you cried the same way she cried. You protect your belly the same way she did. You tilt your head when you listen, just like she used to." His voice cracked. "You looked at me like she did when she tried to be brave even while breaking." Mira swallowed hard. "Maybe you see what you want to see." Caleb didn't deny it. He gestured toward the door. "Come inside. Please, you're cold and the baby needs warmth." Inside, the cabin was cleaner than any man's home she had ever stepped into. The floor swept, the bedding fluffed, the table polished. A row of dried herbs hung above the stove, and above them a carved wooden cradle sat waiting beside the wall, waiting for a baby who had died 5 winters ago. Mira felt tears prick her eyes. "Did you keep everything the same?" "No," Caleb said quietly, removing his coat. "I rebuilt it." "You rebuilt it?" she echoed. He nodded, setting his gloves aside. "The old cabin. I burned it after I buried them. I couldn't breathe inside those walls." His throat tightened. "This one I built from the ground up, every log, every nail, every stone in the hearth. I built it in the hope that one day maybe I wouldn't be alone anymore." The confession landed between them like something fragile and holy. Mira lowered herself into the nearest chair. The baby pressed hard against her ribs, making her wince. Caleb instantly knelt beside her, steadying her knee, worry flaring in his eyes. "Are you hurting?" "A little," she whispered. "He's just active." She hadn't meant to say he, but the word slipped out. Caleb's expression warmed with awe. He. He placed a hand on her shin, careful, hesitant. "I never thought I'd hear that again, not in my lifetime." Mira's chest tightened. "Caleb, I don't know how long I can pretend." He looked up at her, something like understanding settling in the lines of his weathered face. "Then don't pretend. Be exactly who you are. Miriam Sutton." He paused. "The woman I brought home because I couldn't bear to watch the world crush her." Her breath stuttered. "You knew I wasn't Lydia." "From the second you spoke." He offered a faint, broken smile. "Lydia never called anyone sir. She would have scolded me for dragging her away from a funeral." Relief flooded her. Shame, too, and something warmer. "Then why did you take me?" Caleb rose slowly, bracing his hand against the table as if steadying more than just his balance. "Because your eyes looked just like hers did the night before she died," he said. "Terrified, alone, holding that belly like it was the only thing keeping you alive." His voice softened into something raw. "I couldn't save Lydia, but I could save you." Mira's breath trembled. "And now?" Caleb stepped close, slow, careful, as if approaching a wounded animal in a trap. "Now," he said, "you don't owe me her memory. You only owe yourself safety, rest, a chance." He glanced toward the cradle. "This child deserves that too." Silence bloomed between them, thick and warm like the light from the fire. Finally, Mira whispered, "I can stay for a little while." Caleb's shoulders dropped in quiet relief. "Stay as long as you need." He didn't say forever. He didn't say Lydia. He didn't touch her without permission. And because of that, because he asked for nothing, Mira felt something loosen inside her chest for the first time since Jacob's death. Safety, hope, possibility. The first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and adjustment. Mira had expected fear to settle over her like a heavy winter quilt. Instead, what settled was something gentler, quiet, unfamiliar, strangely comforting. The cabin, though built from Caleb's grief, now held a new kind of warmth. Caleb never once asked her to act like Lydia again. He never once referred to her by that name. He let the past rest in the earth where it belonged, and slowly the cabin began to feel like a place where Mira could breathe. On the second morning, she awoke to the scent of wood smoke and frying venison. Caleb had been awake long before dawn. She could hear the steady rhythm of his axe splitting logs outside. When he came back in, snow dusted his hair and shoulders, but his cheeks were flushed from the cold. He moved quietly so as not to startle her. "You hungry?" he asked, a little too cautiously, as though afraid she might reject even the offer of food. Mira nodded. Caleb's cooking was surprisingly good, simple but nourishing, exactly what her swollen body needed. He plated her food first, placing it gently in front of her, before taking his own portion. "Thank you," she murmured. His head dipped once. "You're welcome." It became a pattern. Caleb always let her eat before him, not out of pity, but out of the instinctive protectiveness of a man who had watched someone starve in front of him. Daily chores shaped their new rhythm. Mira swept the floors, dusted the shelves, and washed dishes in warm water heated on the stove. She moved slowly, her hand on the small of her back, but she insisted on helping. "You don't have to," Caleb told her one afternoon as he hauled in an armful of split logs. "And you shouldn't be doing everything alone," she replied. He studied her a moment, then nodded. "If something's too heavy, you say so." She smiled faintly. "I will." She didn't, but Caleb watched her closely anyway. When she tried to lift a bucket of water that was clearly too heavy, he was there instantly, taking it from her hands. "No," he said gently but firmly. "You'll hurt yourself." Mira's cheeks flushed. "I can help." "You are helping," he replied, "just by being here." Those simple words, "just by being here," echoed in her mind the entire day. No one had ever said that to her. Caleb fixed the loose shutter on the north-facing window, mended the fence line, and stacked 3 months of firewood under the eaves. Meanwhile, Mira spent her afternoon sewing small garments from leftover cloth, tiny shirts, soft blankets, a little cap. Caleb noticed the pile on her lap one evening. He paused, leaning against the doorframe. "You making clothes?" he asked. She looked up sheepishly. "Yes, they're not perfect, but—" "They're perfect enough," Caleb said. "He'll be warm." He hesitated, voice softer. "Thank you." Her needle stilled. "For what?" "For preparing as though—" He swallowed. "As though you mean to stay." Mira didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. Little moments revealed parts of Caleb he rarely showed. He carved a wooden spoon and left it on the table without comment. He lined the walkway to the outhouse with pine branches so the snow wouldn't be too slippery beneath her feet. He built a small wooden stool so she could elevate her legs near the fire. But the moment that lodged itself in her heart happened on a bitterly cold morning when Mira tried to chop vegetables, but her hands shook too badly. Caleb stepped behind her, not touching, just close enough for her to feel his presence. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "My hands, they're swollen today." His calloused fingertips brushed hers lightly, testing the puffiness. "You're working too hard. Sit." "I'm fine." "Sit," he repeated, but softly, without command, in his tone. She sat. Caleb took the knife and chopped with slow, deliberate strokes, as though performing something sacred. When he finished, he slid the bowl toward her. "Just tell me what you want done," he said. "I'll do it." Mira's breath caught. "You don't have to wait on me." He stopped, meeting her gaze. "Mira, I failed my wife because I wasn't there when she needed me most. I can't change that. But I can make damn sure I don't fail you." Her throat tightened. "I'm not Lydia." "I know," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to be." As the days grew colder, the world outside became a blanket of white. Snow drifted high against the cabin walls, and wind howled through the pines. But inside, warmth grew, quiet, steady, unforced. Mira learned that Caleb hummed while he worked, low, rumbling tunes that vibrated through the cabin like distant thunder. She learned that he read the Bible every night by lantern light, even though he rarely set foot in a church. She learned that he slept lightly, rising at the faintest sound, always checking to make sure she was safe. And Caleb learned things about her, too, how she held her belly when the baby kicked, smiling through discomfort, how she whispered to the child in the quiet hours, how she flinched when someone raised their voice, even a little, how she turned away when she cried, embarrassed by her tears. One evening, as she stood by the fire stirring a pot of stew, the baby kicked so hard she gasped. Caleb looked up from sanding a piece of wood. "You all right?" She grabbed the edge of the table. "He's strong." Caleb walked over slowly, uncertain, his hands hovering but not touching. "May I?" She hesitated only a moment before guiding his hand to her belly. The baby kicked again. Caleb froze. Then his eyes softened, glistening as though the world had just split open in front of him. That's real," he whispered. Mira laughed gently through growing tears. "Of course he's real." Caleb shook his head, clearing his throat. "No, I mean life. Again. In this house." She understood. This was the first child he had felt since Grace, the first heartbeat of hope, the first sign that he could love without fear of losing. Mira placed her hand over his. "He'll have a good life, Caleb." Caleb swallowed hard. "Not without you." She met his gaze, the fire reflecting in both their eyes. In that moment, something changed. She wasn't playing a part anymore. He wasn't mistaking her for a ghost. It was just Mira and Caleb and the fragile beginnings of something real. "Go sit down," Caleb murmured finally, voice rough. "I'll finish stirring." Mira obeyed, but her heart beat faster than it had in years. By the third week, she realized something astonishing. She no longer felt like an intruder in Lydia's home. She felt like a woman building her own life alongside a man who carried scars as deep as hers. And every night, when Caleb checked the door locks, banked the fire, and whispered good night in that gravelly voice, Mira felt her defenses crumble more and more. If she wasn't careful, she thought, she might actually fall in love with him. She already was. Winter pressed harder than either of them had predicted. By late November, snow piled high against the cabin walls, and the wind sounded like a wounded creature clawing at the windows. Mira rarely stepped outside now. The weight of her nearing labor slowed her steps, and the cold bit through her bones too easily. Caleb insisted she stay close to the fire while he worked, but storms on the mountain were nothing compared to storms rising in the valley below. Rumors had begun to spread. A hunter passing through Bitter Ridge had caught sight of Caleb carrying a heavily pregnant woman on horseback. Another hunter saw them riding deeper into Sawtooth territory. Another one claimed he saw Caleb buying extra stores at the trading post, women's stores. Whispers grew, questions multiplied, and curiosity became a knife. One frigid morning, while Mira rested by the fire with her swollen feet propped on the little stool Caleb carved, he pushed open the door with an armful of kindling, snow still clinging to his beard. The moment he shut the door behind him, she knew something was wrong. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense, and his eyes, usually so steady, looked troubled. "Caleb?" she asked. "What happened?" He dropped the wood beside the hearth and knelt to shake the snow from it. Only when the fire crackled again did he speak. "There were tracks," he said quietly. "Fresh ones. 3 sets of boots. They were following our trail up the ridge." Mira's hand flew to her belly. "Are they coming here?" "Not today," Caleb said. "Storm chased 'em back, but they'll return." Her heart pounded. "Why? Why would anyone come here?" Caleb hesitated. "Because of you." Mira felt the room tilt. "Me? They think I took a woman from town. And not just any woman, a pregnant widow." His voice darkened. Words spread fast. And Bitter Ridge has never been kind to women who can't defend themselves. Mira closed her eyes. Shame rose in her throat like flames. She could imagine it. The townsfolk whispering that she had been stolen, or worse, that Caleb had forced her to go, as if she had power enough over her life to choose anything at all. "Pastor Whitlock," Caleb added, bitterness thickening his tone. "He's stirring it the worst. The same man who mocked her at the burial, the same man who urged her toward a brothel." Of course, he would twist the story. "He's saying you were taken against your will," Caleb said, "that you're being held captive on this mountain." Mira's breath caught. "But that's not true." "I know," he said softly, "but truth ain't what they want." She looked at him then, really looked at him, a scar along his brow, the hardened set of his jaw, the weight of grief carried in every breath. "They think you're dangerous," she whispered. "Always have." Caleb shrugged. "But now they've got reason to come looking. A woman like you, pregnant, alone, abandoned, makes for good gossip. And trouble." The cabin felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing inward. "What will we do?" Mira asked. Caleb rose slowly, crossing to her with heavy steps. He knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "We survive," he said simply, "like we always do." But trouble did not wait long. 3 days later, just before dusk, Caleb returned from chopping wood with snow plastered to his coat and dread written across his features. "They're coming," he said. "5 men on horseback. I saw 'em at the far ridge." Mira's heart stuttered. "Here? Headed this way? And they ain't bringing flowers?" Mira struggled to her feet, clutching the table to steady herself. Fear shot through her. Fear for herself, for Caleb, for the child twisting beneath her ribs. "Do they want to hurt us?" Caleb stepped close, cupping her face gently. "They won't touch you, not while I'm alive." She believed him, but fear had its own voice. "What will you do?" she whispered. "Give 'em the truth," Caleb replied, "if they'll hear it." "And if they won't?" His jaw clenched. "Then we do what we must." The men reached the cabin at nightfall. Snow crunched under hooves. Lantern light bobbed outside. Mira sat trembling on the edge of the bed as Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Pastor Whitlock was among them, face twisted with righteous fury. Beside him stood Sheriff Albright, 2 miners, and a rancher, carrying a shotgun. "Caleb Morrison," the sheriff shouted, "we're here for the woman." Caleb didn't raise his rifle, but he didn't lower it either. "She ain't going anywhere." Whitlock rode forward, pointing a gloved finger at Caleb. "You stole a pregnant widow from her husband's grave. You abducted her, just like you did your first wife." Caleb stiffened. Lightning cracked behind his eyes. "I buried my wife because she died," he growled. "I didn't lay a hand on her." "Lies!" Whitlock thundered. "And now you've taken another poor soul to replace her spirit." Inside the cabin, Mira's breath hitched. Her legs shook as she shuffled to the door. "I'm not stolen," she shouted, throwing it open. The men turned, shocked. Mira stood in the doorway, face pale but steady, one hand on her swollen belly, the other braced against the frame. "I'm here because he saved me," she said. "He paid my husband's debt. He carried me away when no one else cared if I lived or died. He has cared for me and my baby with more kindness than any of you ever showed." Whitlock scowled. "You expect us to believe that?" Mira's voice rose, trembling with fury and long-buried hurt. "You left me to starve. You mocked me at my husband's grave. You told me to sell myself for coin, and now you dare call him dangerous?" The wind howled. No one spoke. Finally, the sheriff cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sutton, if you truly wish to stay with Mr. Morrison, then by law we cannot interfere." Whitlock whirled on him. "You fool! She's been brainwashed. Look at her. She's frightened." "Yes," Mira said, stepping forward. "I am frightened, but not of him, not of the man who kept me alive. I'm frightened of you." Whitlock's mouth opened, but no words came, because the truth was a blade sharper than any knife. The sheriff tipped his hat. "We're done here." One by one, the men turned and rode away. Only Whitlock lingered, seething, before finally following. When they were gone, Caleb turned to Mira. "You didn't have to say all that," he murmured. "Yes," she said softly, "I did." Caleb looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a woman who needed saving, not as a ghost from his past, but as someone who could stand beside him, not behind. Mira reached for his hand. "I'm not Lydia," she whispered, "but I want to be the woman who stays." Caleb's breath hitched. "You already are." Winter deepened into something primal, the kind of cold that silenced forests and froze rivers in place. For a time after the confrontation, peace returned to the cabin. Caleb kept watch each night, sitting near the window with his rifle across his knees, while Mira slept with one hand curved protectively over her belly. He told her not to worry, but the mountain had ears, and bitterness had long legs, and Pastor Whitlock was not a man who accepted humiliation. It happened on a night when the wind fell eerily still, too still, as if the mountain itself held its breath. Mira woke to a strange pressure low in her belly, sharp and heavy. She reached for Caleb, calling his name. He was already up. Something in the air had roused him. His eyes swept the shadowed room. His hand drifted automatically toward the rifle leaning beside the hearth. "Stay here," he murmured. "I heard something outside." "Caleb," her voice broke with pain, "I think it's time." He froze. For one heartbeat, fear flickered in his eyes, the memory of Lydia's death rising like a ghost from the floorboards. But then he exhaled slowly, forced his hand steady, and knelt beside her. "We'll get through this," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "I ain't losing you." Before she could answer, a heavy thud sounded against the front door, then another. The wood shuddered under the blows. Caleb sprang to his feet. "Get back from the door, Morrison," came a familiar voice. "We are taking the woman now." Whitlock. Caleb's jaw locked. "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged," the pastor spat. "She's bewitched you. You're blinded by sin, and the child she carries is proof. You're not fit to raise a soul on this mountain." The words stabbed through the wood like knives. Mira clutched her belly, a cry escaping her as another contraction tore through her. Sweat dotted her brow. Caleb's heart lurched. He looked between the door, bulging inward under the men's blows, and Mira sinking to her knees beside the bed. He had seconds to choose. He chose her. In one swift motion, Caleb shoved a heavy wooden beam against the door and bolted it. "Hold on," he whispered, rushing back to Mira. "I'm right here." Outside, Whitlock yelled for the men to break the hinges. Inside, Mira's world narrowed to pain and terror. "Caleb, it hurts. I can't." "Yes, you can." His voice was firm but trembling. "Look at me. Just me. We're going to bring this baby into the world together." A crack splintered through the doorframe. Snow blew in around the edges as the hinges groaned. Mira screamed as the next contraction hit. Caleb knelt in front of her, gripping her hands. His breath shook, but his voice stayed steady. "Push when your body tells you to. You're strong, Mira, stronger than you know." Another crack, another scream from her, another bellow from Whitlock. You're endangering that child. Let us in." "No," Caleb roared. "You'll never touch them." Something in his voice, raw, broken, fierce, ignited something inside Mira that fear could not quench. She bore down, teeth clenched, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's coming," Caleb said, wiping sweat from her temple. "You're doing it, Mira." Her world dissolved into pain and his voice. Outside, the door gave one last violent buck. But then the storm returned, an avalanche of wind and ice slamming down the ridge. Snow roared off the cliffs like thunder. The men outside cursed, scrambling for their horses. Whitlock's voice drifted through the storm, furious but fading. The mountain had answered for them, driving the intruders back. When the noise finally died, Mira collapsed against Caleb's chest, breath shuddering. "Caleb, I can't. I'm so tired." "You're almost there." His fingers trembled as he supported her. "One more, just one more." She pushed with the last of her strength. A cry pierced the cabin, sharp, bright, alive. Caleb gasped, lifting the tiny, wailing bundle with shaking hands. We did it," he whispered, voice cracking. "He's here." Mira sobbed, relief flooding her body. Caleb wrapped the baby in a quilt and laid him gently against her chest. But when he looked at her, something inside him shattered completely, not from fear, not from grief, but from love so vast it nearly brought him to his knees. "You're alive," he choked. "You're alive, and the baby's alive." He couldn't finish. Mira lifted her gaze to his, weak but steady. "I told you," she whispered. "I'm not Lydia, but I'm yours if you want me." Caleb cupped her face with both hands, forehead touching hers. "I want you. God help me, I want you more than breath." Outside, the storm buried Whitlock's footprints. Inside, 3 heartbeats warmed the cabin with a future Whitlock could no longer touch. Morning crept over the ridge slowly, like a shy visitor peeking through the last veil of the storm. Light spilled across the valley, glinting off the snowdrift piled high around the cabin. Inside, the fire burned low, casting a soft amber glow over everything it touched. Mira lay propped against pillows Caleb had stacked behind her, the newborn tucked against her chest, his tiny breaths warm against her skin. The pain still throbbed in her body, but it was softened by something deeper, something almost unreal. Peace? Caleb hovered close, not touching her unless she reached for him, as though she were something sacred. His hands were scratched from repairing the door in the dark, his jaw dusted with stubble, his eyes rimmed red from fear, exhaustion, and awe. "He's perfect," he murmured, gazing at the baby with a wonder that looked almost like fear. "I can't believe he's real." Mira brushed a fingertip across the baby's cheek. "He's real, and he's ours." The last word caught in her throat. She wasn't sure she had the right to say it, to claim anything that belonged to Caleb Morrison. But he didn't flinch, didn't correct her. He only sank to his knees beside the bed and rested one rough hand against her ankle. "You saved him," he whispered. "You saved yourself. You saved me." Mira shook her head. "No, you saved me the moment you took me off that hill. You saved me again when you believed I was worth saving." He swallowed hard, leaning closer. "You're more than worth it. And I ain't letting anyone take you away, not the pastor, not the town, not anyone." She studied him quietly, the broad shoulders, the haunted eyes, the gentleness he tried so hard to hide, and beneath all of it, the grief he had carried alone for 5 years. "You're not replacing Lydia," she said softly, "and I'm not trying to." Caleb looked at the floor. Shame flickered briefly across his face. "I know. But," she continued, reaching for his hand, "I can love you, if you'll let me." He stared at her, stunned. Hope flickered in his expression, wounded, hesitant, but alive. "I want you too," he said, "more than anything I've wanted since I buried her." Silence settled between them, not sharp or painful, but warm, healing. The baby stirred in Mira's arms. Caleb touched the tiny fist poking from the blanket. "What will we call him?" he asked. "We talked about Jacob," she said, smiling softly, "to honor his father, and Caleb, for the man who saved him." Caleb's eyes closed as if the words were too much. When he opened them again, tears glistened in the corners. "Jacob Caleb Morrison," he whispered, "my son." The weight of it settled gently over the room. A new name, a new beginning. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, not the brutal, punishing snow of a mountain storm, just soft flakes drifting down like blessings. Caleb stood, lifted Mira, slowly, carefully, into his arms, and carried her to the rocking chair beside the fire. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and sat on the floor beside her, his head resting against her thigh, his hand curled around hers. "You're safe here," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "If you want this place, if you want me, it's your home now." Mira leaned her head back, eyes filling. "I do want it. I want all of it. I want you." Caleb closed his eyes, breath shaking with relief. In that small cabin on a lonely mountain, beneath a sky clearing to gold, a new family began its quiet heartbeat, one made not of blood, but of compassion, courage, and the choice to keep loving despite every wound. And as dawn touched the snow with soft fire, a question hung gently in the air, one neither of them dared to voice aloud. Would love be enough to protect them from the world waiting below? Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people who seem the most broken are the ones carrying the deepest strength. Caleb and Mira weren't meant to cross paths. Loss, cruelty, and circumstance should have kept them worlds apart. But on a lonely mountain, through pain and storms and a child born into chaos, they found something the world had denied them both. If you're listening right now, tell me, where are you hearing this story from? Which city? Which country? Your comments breathe life into these frontier tales. And if you still believe in love that rises from grief, stay close. The next story awaits you. August 1884, Redemption Springs, Wyoming. The heat lay over the little town like a curse. Dust hung in the air, the main street empty, except for a few tired horses tied outside the saloon. Inside the cool, shadowed office of Redemption Bank, a man's whole life was being weighed and priced. Thomas Whitfield stood hat in hand, shoulders bent from 30 years of working the same 200 acres. His shirt was clean, but frayed at the cuffs. His sunburned hands knotted with calluses. Beside him stood his daughter, Rose, 24 years old and large enough that her calico dress strained at the seams. Her cheeks flushed easily, and today they burned a deep, humiliated red. Across the polished oak desk sat Cornelius Vanderberg, owner of the bank and half the town besides. His hair was silver and perfectly combed, his black suit without a speck of dust. A gold watch chain glinted across his vest. His eyes were sharp and cold as a snake's. "Mr. Whitfield," Cornelius said, tapping a sheaf of papers, "you owe this institution $800. Principal and interest due today. You are months past your last extension." Thomas swallowed hard. "Mr. Vanderberg, sir, We had no snow melt this spring. The creek near dried up. My wheat burned to dust on the stalk. Give me until next harvest, and I swear—" Cornelius's palm cracked down on the desk. "No more grace, Whitfield. I am not in the charity business. You pay today, or I foreclose on your land. All of it." Rose's fingers tightened around her father's arm. That land wasn't just dirt and fences. It was her mother's grave under the lone cottonwood. It was every dawn she'd watched with a coffee cup in her hand and hope in her chest. Cornelius leaned back, lips curling. "However, I am a man of solutions." His gaze slid over to Rose, traveling slowly from her round shoulders to the soft swell of her belly. "You have something of value besides land." Rose's stomach turned. She knew that look. She'd seen it in the saloon doorways, in the alley behind the general store. A look that weighed her not as a person, but as a thing. "My daughter is not collateral," Thomas said hoarsely. "Don't be dramatic," Cornelius replied. "Here is my offer. I erase your debt, every penny. I even put $200 in your pocket. In return, your daughter marries my son, Reginald." Rose's heart lurched. Reginald Vander Berg. Every woman in Redemption Springs knew his name. Drink, cards, fists. A wife dead under mysterious circumstances, and nobody brave enough to ask what had really happened. Thomas stared at the floor. "Sir, your boy deserves a finer lady than—" "Than this?" Cornelius cut in, flicking his eyes over Rose. "Let's be honest, Whitfield. No man with options will ever choose your daughter. She eats like 3, takes up the space of 2, and will spend the rest of her life breaking chairs and wearing out wagon springs. My boy is willing to shoulder that burden. You should be grateful." The words hit like stones. Rose had heard every insult in the book, but spoken in this quiet, civilized room, they cut deeper than drunken laughter ever had. "I will not sell my daughter," Thomas whispered. Cornelius's smile turned thin and cruel. "Then I take your land. Your choice, Whitfield. Your fat daughter or your farm." The room seemed to shrink. Rose felt her father tremble beside her. Losing the land would kill him. Marrying Reginald might kill her. She drew a shaky breath. "Papa, if this saves the farm, I can—" The office door burst open so hard it rattled the glass. Every head turned. A giant of a man filled the doorway, broad as the frame itself. He wore trail-stained buckskins, a battered hat, pushed back on dark hair tied at its neck. A heavy beard framed a scarred face, and his eyes, deep, steady brown, took in the scene in a single sweep. The papers, the banker, the pale, trembling farmer, and the round young woman standing like a prisoner awaiting sentence. Elijah Stone, Eli, mountain man, trapper, and the name mothers whispered when they wanted their children to come inside before dark. His voice rumbled low and certain. "You've got it wrong, Vanderberg." He stepped into the room, boots thudding on the floorboards. "He ain't gotta choose between his land and his daughter." Those dark eyes settled on Rose, and for the first time that day, someone looked at her without flinching. "I'll marry her," Eli said, "right now." The bank office erupted into stunned silence. Even the dust motes hanging in the sunlight seemed to freeze mid-air. Thomas Whitfield blinked at Elijah Stone as though the man had spoken in a foreign tongue. Rose's breath caught. She felt her pulse pounding behind her ears. And Cornelius Vander Berg, ever the master of a poised facade, momentarily lost it. His mouth dropped open before snapping shut again like a trap. "You?" Cornelius scoffed. "You want to marry her?" He jabbed a finger toward Rose as though she were a sack of grain. "You know what you're offering to take on, Stone." Eli didn't look away from Rose. "I know exactly what I'm taking on." Then he finally turned, voice hard as granite. "And I know what you were fixing to do. You don't offer mercy. You trade in misery." Cornelius bristled. "You have no right to interrupt a legal matter." "That why you're threatening a farmer and his daughter behind a locked door?" Eli replied. Cornelius opened his mouth to retort, but the mountain man was already setting a leather pouch on the desk. The heavy thud made Mr. Vanderburg's eyes sharpen. He opened it. Gold coins and nuggets spilled like hardened sunshine. "There's your 800, Eli said. "Every penny Whitfield owes." Cornelius's fingers twitched toward the gold, but greed rarely lets a man act without theatrics. "If I take this," he drawled, "I expect something in return." Eli stepped closer, towering. "You'll get my fist in your teeth if you keep pushing. The debt's paid. Write the release." Cornelius hesitated, but only for the span of a heartbeat. He wanted the gold too badly. With stiff fingers, he scribbled the signature and shoveled the pouch toward himself like a man burying treasure. Rose watched it in a daze. Debt erased. In minutes. Because a man she barely knew had decided so. When Cornelius slid the paper across the desk, Eli nodded once and turned to her and her father. "And her? We're going to the church. Reverend Thompson will see us." Rose's lips parted. "But why? You don't even know me." Eli's gaze softened, not warm, not tender, but steady, unflinching. "I know you ain't meant for a man like Reginald Vanderburg. And I know you needed someone to step in. I was there. That's enough for now." Cornelius chuckled. "Just wait till he sees what a burden a big girl is." Eli turned back, eyes gone cold. "You keep talking, banker, and I'll forget I came here peaceful." Cornelius wisely shut his mouth. Eli touched Rose's elbow lightly, as though afraid she might recoil. "Come on. Let's get you out of here." They left the bank with Thomas trailing behind, still wiping his eyes. Outside, the heat hit them like a wall. People along the street paused to stare. A few whispered. Someone muttered, "Big Rose Whitfield finally got herself a man, poor devil." Eli didn't give them a glance. He helped Thomas into the shade of the general store awning, then turned to Rose. "We go now, before the banker or his boy cause trouble." Rose's voice trembled. "You're sure? You truly want to go through with this?" Eli held her gaze. "A man steps in, he finishes the job. And I ain't letting Vanderburg's son lay a hand on you." She swallowed hard. "All right." The church was small and hot, white paint peeling under the August sun. Reverend Thompson hurried in, flustered, wiping sweat from his brow when he heard the news. "A wedding? Now? My word, this is rather abrupt." Eli removed his hat. "We're ready, Reverend." Rose stood beside him, hands twisting in her skirt. The Reverend cleared his throat, opened his Bible, and began. It was the shortest ceremony of Rose's life, yet every word felt strangely heavy, like each one was tying knots she could never undo. She stumbled slightly over her vows, voice thin and trembling. Eli's voice, in contrast, came low and sure. At the end, the Reverend said, "You may kiss the bride?" Eli didn't kiss her. Instead, he lifted her hand gently, pressed his lips to her knuckles, and murmured, "Mrs. Stone?" Something in her chest fluttered painfully. Thomas embraced her, crying openly. "Rose, my girl, God bless you. I'm so sorry it had to be this way." She clung to him. "It's all right, Papa. We'll be all right." Eli waited respectfully until father and daughter let go. Then he saddled his buckskin horse, cinched the packs, and extended a hand toward her stirrup. "It's a 3-day ride," he said. "Mountain trails, hard travel, but I'll look after you." Rose placed her foot in the stirrup. His hands, calloused, steady, lifted her with surprising gentleness. She settled in the saddle, heart pounding. Eli mounted his own horse, turned toward the long line of mountains rising blue on the horizon, and said quietly, "Let's go home." Rose glanced back once at the dusty street, at her father shrinking in the distance, at the life she'd known. Then she turned forward, toward a future she could not yet imagine. "Home," she whispered. The mountains rose before them like a wall built by God's own hands, vast, jagged, and so impossibly high that Rose felt small just looking at them. Pines thickened as they climbed, the scent of sap and cold stone replacing the dust of Redemption Springs. By the end of the first day, her thighs burned and her lower back throbbed. Eli noticed, without asking. "We camp here," he said, nodding toward a clearing by a creek. He tethered the horses, gathered wood, and built a fire with the ease of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Rose tried to help, but he shook his head gently. "Sit. Rest. I've got it." She obeyed, partly because she was exhausted, partly because something about Eli's quiet authority made refusal feel unnecessary. He handed her a tin cup of warm broth. "Drink. You'll feel better." The broth was simple, bones and herbs, but after the day she'd had, it tasted like comfort itself. Eli ate little, as though he didn't want to take more until she'd had her fill. When the fire burned low, he rose and set up her bedroll inside a canvas lean-to. "You sleep under cover," he said. "I'll stay by the fire." Rose's cheeks warmed. "But we're married. You don't need to." Eli stopped her with a small motion of his hand. "You deserve time and safety. That's what I promised when I stepped between you and the banker." The way he said it, steady, without judgment, made a lump rise in her throat. All her life, men had looked at her body with disgust or mockery, never with respect, never with restraint. "Thank you," she whispered. "Get some rest. Long day tomorrow." Rose crawled into the lean-to. Exhaustion overtook her, but before she drifted off, she saw Eli sitting by the fire, the flames lighting the scars across his cheek. His eyes were on the dark woods, alert, watchful. He didn't sleep at all. The second day was steeper, the air thinner. They climbed narrow ridges where the drop beneath them made Rose grip the rein so tightly her knuckles ached. Eli never rushed her. Whenever her horse faltered, he walked beside it, resting a steady hand on the bridle. "You're doing fine," he said each time she apologized. By nightfall, her body felt like it had been carved from lead. Eli camped among boulders that blocked the wind, cooked venison strips over the fire, and once again slept outside. On the third day, they reached a plateau with sweeping views of the valley below. Rose gasped. The world stretched in every direction, painted with wildflowers and sunlight. Eli stopped beside her horse and pointed toward a slope where smoke rose in a thin curl. "That's the cabin," he said. Her heart bounced against her ribs. Their cabin, their home. As they approached, she saw it. A sturdy, weathered log home tucked between tall pines, roof patched carefully, smoke rising from a stone chimney. A small garden grew along one side. A few hens scratched near a coop. A split-rail fence circled the front, and a narrow trail led down to a gleaming creek. It was humble. It was isolated. and it was the most peaceful place she'd ever seen. Eli helped her down from the saddle. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but his hand steadied her, warm and solid. "Come in," he said. Inside, the cabin was cleaner than she expected, orderly, almost meticulous. A hand-carved table, 2 chairs, a large bed against the far wall, a shelf of tanned hides, a couple of framed sketches, charcoal drawings of mountains and rivers, and above the fireplace, a single portrait, a young woman with dark hair, soft eyes, and a gentle smile. Rose froze. "Is that your wife?" Eli's boots creaked as he crossed the room and gently took the picture down. "Rebecca," he said quietly. "She was my world." Rose swallowed. What happened to her?" He didn't answer immediately. He set the portrait aside, lowering himself into a wooden chair as though his bones suddenly weighed too much. "People in town say I killed her," he said. "They say I killed my daughter, too." A chill rippled through Rose, but she didn't move away. She waited. "She wasn't murdered," he said finally. "She died because I wasn't there to protect her." Silence filled the cabin, not awkward, but heavy with memory. "I was out on the far ridge, tracking a cougar that had been stealing from our traps. A storm rolled in faster than I expected. When I came back," he swallowed hard. The roof had partially collapsed under the weight of ice. Rebecca got trapped. Our little girl, Hannah, suffocated before I could dig them out. Rose covered her mouth. "Eli, I'm so sorry." "The town needed someone to blame," he said. "They couldn't blame a storm, so they blamed me. I didn't fight it. I didn't have the strength." Rose stepped closer. "But you're not that man anymore. You're the man who saved me and my father." Eli's eyes lifted to hers, dark, tired, but filled with something she hadn't expected. "Maybe," he said. "I'm trying, but there's a lot of ghosts in these walls." Rose nodded slowly. "Then we'll face them together." For the first time since they'd met, something like softness touched Eli's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Rose," he said quietly, "I don't expect anything from you. Not tonight. Not ever, unless you offer it freely. You're safe here." She felt warmth surge through her chest. Unexpected. Overwhelming. "I know," she whispered. That night, Rose cooked supper, her mother's recipe for rabbit stew. Eli watched her move about the kitchen, his gaze thoughtful. She saw him notice the way she hummed while she chopped vegetables, how she wiped her hands on her apron, how she tasted the broth with a quiet sigh. When they sat down to eat, Eli murmured almost wonderingly, "I'd forgotten what a warm home feels like." Rose looked at him across the table. Maybe we both needed one. Outside, the wind rushed through the pines. Inside, the fire crackled, and though neither of them said it aloud, something had begun. The first morning Rose woke in Eli's cabin, she didn't know where she was. For one disorienting second, she thought she was still in her childhood bedroom, listening to her father chopping wood outside and her mother humming over the stove. But then the scent of pine smoke and wild mint drifted in through the door, and the memory of everything, her forced engagement, Eli's intervention, the sudden marriage, returned in a wave. She sat up slowly. Her muscles were sore from the journey, but her heart felt strangely light. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the main room. Eli was already awake, crouched by the fireplace as he coaxed the morning fire into a brighter glow. He did not yet notice her. She watched him quietly, his broad shoulders moving as he worked, the gentle way his fingers adjusted the logs. There was something unexpectedly careful about him, a precision that did not match the reputation of a wild mountain man. "You're up early," he said without turning. Rose startled. I couldn't sleep more." "You'll sleep deeper here," he said. "Takes a few days." He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the table for her before pouring one for himself. Rose wrapped her hands around the warmth, inhaling deeply. She didn't know when anyone had last made something for her simply because they wanted to. "Thank you," she murmured. Eli nodded and opened the cabin door. A gust of cold mountain air swept in, sharp but refreshing. "I'm going to check the traps and split some wood. There's bread and jerky if you get hungry." Rose hesitated. "Is there anything I can do to help?" He paused, a long, assessing silence. Then, "If you want, you can tidy or rest. You're not here to work for me, Rose." She looked down at her cup. "I know, but I want to help. I'm not used to being cared for." Eli's eyes softened in a way she didn't expect. "All right. Make the place your own. Do whatever feels right." He stepped outside, leaving Rose alone with a cabin that still smelled faintly of another woman's lavender soap. Rose cleaned slowly, learning the rhythm of the home. She swept the floor, dusted the shelves, and washed the dishes. She hummed softly to herself, the way she used to as a girl, when no one could hear her and tell her to stop. She wiped the windows until the sunlight spilled in brighter than before. When Eli returned near midday, he stopped in the doorway and looked around. The air felt lighter. The floor gleamed. A vase of wild flowers, picked from just behind the cabin, sat on the table. Rose suddenly felt self-conscious. Is it all right? I wanted it to feel warm." Eli stepped inside, his boots crunching softly on the freshly swept floor. "It feels different," he said, "like someone's actually living here." She smiled timidly. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is," he said quietly. "It is." For the first time since she'd met him, Rose saw something approaching peace settle into his features. A man who had lived alone for so long suddenly remembering what home could feel like. Over the next few weeks, they slipped into a rhythm that felt natural. Rose rose early to cook breakfast, biscuits with honey or fried potatoes, depending on what they had. Eli would bring in armfuls of wood each morning and set about his work, mending traps, tending fences, or hunting. He always left the biggest cuts of meat on her plate. At first, Rose tried to protest, but Eli only shook his head. "I eat to live. You should eat to enjoy." It made her heart flutter in a way she wasn't prepared for. There were small kindnesses every day, so soft and subtle she almost missed them. Eli carved a wooden stool so she could stand comfortably at the kitchen counter. He sharpened her kitchen knife so finely it sliced vegetables like air. He noticed when she shivered and, without speaking, draped a heavy fur over her shoulders. He never touched her without intention, never assumed anything of her. Yet each act felt like a thread, weaving them closer together. One afternoon, Rose struggled to split a piece of kindling. She lifted the axe, hesitated, then swung too softly, barely cracking the wood. Eli appeared behind her, silent as a shadow. "May I?" he asked. She nodded, embarrassed. "I'm not very strong." "You don't need to be," he said. "You just haven't learned yet." He stepped behind her, close enough that she felt the warmth of his chest against her back, but not close enough to overwhelm. His hands, large, scarred, steady, closed over hers on the axe handle. "Grip it like this," he murmured. Her breath caught. Eli guided the arc of her swing, slow and deliberate. The axe came down cleanly, splitting the log in one stroke. "There," he said softly. "Told you." Rose's heart thundered so loudly she worried he could hear it. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli stepped back instantly, putting space between them, but the heat lingered. That evening, Rose cooked stew, rabbits from Eli's traps, carrots she'd dug from the small garden. She added thyme, garlic, and a pinch of salt she'd carried from home. When she tasted it, she smiled. It reminded her of her mother. They ate together near the fireplace. The flames cast golden light across Eli's face, softening the sharp lines, making him look younger, gentler. He watched Rose as she ate, as though memorizing the way she savored the food. "You're a good cook," he said. "You make it easy," she replied. "You always bring the best food." He shifted slightly, but there was warmth in his voice when he answered, "I like seeing you eat well." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but full of something blooming, something fragile and new. Later that night, a storm rolled in. Lightning flashed across the sky, thunder rumbling through the mountains. Rose stood at the window, watching the sheets of rain pour down, remembering a childhood storm that had frightened her so badly she'd hidden under the bed. She shivered. Eli noticed. "Storms scare you?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "They make me feel small." He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough she felt protected. "Then stay by the fire. I'll keep it going." Rose looked at him, silhouetted against the flickering glow. He looked like a man carved from the mountain itself, solid, immovable, strong enough to hold back every storm outside and inside her. "Eli," she whispered, surprising herself, "are you ever scared?" He didn't answer right away, then quietly, "Only of losing the people I care about." Her breath hitched. "Do you care about me?" Eli met her eyes. "More than you know." The thunder outside roared, but inside the cabin, the only sound Rose heard was the steady, grounding beat of her own heart, answering something she hadn't dared to hope. Something had shifted, something gentle, something inevitable, and Rose realized, with a soft ache in her chest, that she was falling in love with him, slowly, surely, deeply. Winter arrived early in the high mountains, sweeping down from the peaks like a living thing, cold, relentless, hungry. By mid-November, snow lay thick around the cabin, blanketing the world in white silence. Smoke rose from Eli's chimney day and night, a thin gray thread against the frozen sky. Inside, life had become steady and warm. Rose found comfort in the rhythm of the cabin. Each morning she baked bread or simmered porridge over the fire. She hung herbs to dry along the rafters, sage, rosemary, lavender, and their scents filled the air with a gentle, calming sweetness. When she read by lamplight, Eli would carve wooden figures at the table, the soft rasp of his knife strangely soothing. They were still learning each other, still careful, still dancing around the edges of something deeper than either had expected. But life has a way of testing what is only beginning to bloom. It happened on a bitter morning when Eli went trapping along the ridge. Snow drifted past the windows as Rose scrubbed the kitchen floor, humming softly. Around midday, she went out to gather wood from the pile near the shed. That was when she saw it. Hoof tracks, fresh, too many for just a passing hunter. Her heart tightened. She followed the trail toward the tree line and froze. A scrap of fabric lay caught on a low branch. She knew that color. Dark burgundy. The color of the coats worn by the men who rode with Reginald Vanderburg. The cold suddenly felt sharper, slicing through her cloak. Rose didn't wait. She hurried back inside, bolting the door. Her hand shook as she stirred the fire and pressed her ear to the window. But the only sound was the wind, moaning through the pines like an omen. Eli returned hours later, snow crusting his beard and shoulders. The moment he stepped inside, he stiffened. "What happened?" Rose swallowed hard. "They were here." "Who?" "Reginald's men. I saw the tracks. And a piece of cloth. Their color." Eli's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. He walked to the window, scanned the tree line, then moved the heavy iron bar into place behind the door. "They're scouting," he said, "testing how close they can get." "Why?" Rose whispered. Eli turned to her. His voice was low, even. "Because men like Reginald ain't raised to accept loss. His father bought him everything he ever wanted, paid off every mistake. Now he thinks a woman is no different." "I'm not his," Rose said, almost to herself. Eli crossed the room in 3 strides and took her chin gently in his hand. "You never were." Her lips trembled. "But he'll come for me?" "Yes," Eli said, "and he'll find out he made the last mistake of his life." Rose leaned into his hand, not because she was weak, but because she was tired of bearing fear alone. Eli's thumb brushed her cheek, a silent vow passing between them. Later that night, while the wind scraped at the cabin walls, Rose found Eli quietly reinforcing the shutters with new timber, driving spikes deep into the wood. "You think they'll attack soon?" she said. "I think Reginald's pride is a wound that won't heal, and I think he's a coward. Cowards gather numbers." Rose hesitated. "Eli, if anything happens—" He set down his hammer and turned to her fully. "Nothing's going to happen to you." "But what if it does?" she whispered. "I don't want you hurt because of me." He stepped close, his breath warm against her forehead. "Rose, this is the life I chose. This is the fight I'm ready for. And I would stand between you and the whole damned world if I had to." A sob escaped her, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the realization that someone finally saw her worth. That night, the past found its voice. Rose woke just before dawn, her breath fogging in the cold air. Eli was still asleep beside her. He had finally allowed himself to share her bed after weeks of hesitation, and the warmth of his body had felt like a quiet miracle. But something was wrong. A sound echoed across the valley, a distant metallic clatter. Rose sat upright. "Eli!" He was already awake. He reached for his rifle without a word, moved to the window, and peered through the shutter gap. "Riders," he said. 8, maybe 10. Rose's heart lurched. "It's him." Eli didn't deny it. He returned to the bedside, placed a hand on her cheek, and murmured, "Listen to me. Remember the escape tunnel. Remember where it leads." "No," Rose said fiercely. "I'm not leaving you." Eli held her gaze, something raw flickering in his eyes. "If they kill me, they'll take you, and what they'll do, I won't let that happen." Rose's voice cracked. "Don't make me run from you, not now." He cupped her face between his calloused palms. "I love you, Rose Whitfield Stone. That means I protect you, even from myself, even from this." Her breath caught. He had said the words aloud. Love, not in passing, not in a half-whisper, but with the gravity of a man who meant every letter. Tears blurred her vision. "I love you too." He kissed her, desperate, fierce, full of every emotion he had tried to bury. Then he pulled away far too soon. The thudding of hooves grew louder. "They're here." Eli shoved a rifle into her hands. "If the door falls, you run to the tunnel. You don't look back." She shook her head, but he had already turned away. Outside, voices shouted. Reginald's voice cut through the icy morning air. "Stone, give me the fat girl and we'll let you die quick." Rose's blood turned to ice. The cruelty, the entitlement. It was everything Eli had tried to shield her from. But she wasn't the same frightened woman who had stood in a banker's office months ago. She stood tall behind Eli, rifle in hand. "No," she whispered, "not this time." Eli glanced back at her, surprised, proud, terrified, all at once. Reginald shouted again, "Last chance, Stone, your fat wife or your land." Eli stepped outside onto the porch, rifle raised, shoulders squared against the growing dawn. "You'll get neither," he growled, "and you'll leave this mountain in a coffin." And somewhere behind the fear in Rose's chest, something fierce ignited. Love, defiance, and the unshakable belief that they would face this together. The sky was only beginning to pale behind the jagged teeth of the Wyoming peaks, casting a bruised lavender glow across the valley. Frost clung to the wooden porch, glimmering like shards of broken glass. Eli stood at the threshold of the cabin, rifle steady in his grip, breath rising in pale clouds. Below, in the snow-packed clearing, Reginald Vanderberg sat atop a black gelding, wrapped in a wool coat richer than anything the frontier deserved. 10 armed men surrounded him, some hired guns, some desperate ranch hands lured by the promise of Vanderberg money. Reginald smirked as Eli stepped into view. "Stone, I'll give you one last chance to act wisely. Hand over the fat girl, and I'll let you keep the cabin, maybe even your hide." Eli didn't flinch. "My wife isn't yours to claim." Reginald scoffed. "Your wife? You actually lay claim to that?" He pointed toward the cabin, voice rising. "I don't know what you think you see in her, but she was promised to me, and I always collect what's mine." Eli leveled his rifle. "You'd better pray there's a God in these mountains, because you're going to need him." A shiver ran through the men, though none would admit it. One shifted nervously in his saddle. Another muttered a warning under his breath, but Reginald's pride outweighed his common sense. "Kill him," he ordered. 2 riders broke forward, rifles raised. Eli fired first. One man toppled off his horse, falling into the snow with a dull thud. The second rider fired wildly, grazing Eli's shoulder before Eli dropped him with a clean shot through the chest. Reginald cursed, jerking his horse back. "Spread out! Flush him out!" Gunfire erupted across the clearing. Bullets splintered the porch railing. Wood chips flew. Eli ducked behind a support beam, reloading with practiced speed. He fired again, striking a third man from his saddle. But there were too many. They pressed forward, circling like wolves. Inside the cabin, Rose clutched her rifle, heart hammering in her ribs. She heard every gunshot, every shouted command. She wanted to run to the door, to stand beside Eli, to scream her defiance into the cold morning air, but she remembered what Eli had said. "If the door falls, run. Don't look back." But she couldn't run. Not from this. Not from him. Outside, Eli was breathing hard now. Blood streaked down his arm where the bullet had grazed him earlier. Smoke curled from the mouth of his Winchester. He ducked, shifted, shot, moving with the grace and ferocity of a man who had long ago made peace with danger. But even mountain men bled, and even they could be overwhelmed. A bullet struck the post behind him, showering him with splinters. Another whizzed past his ear. The men were closing rank now, using the pines for cover, advancing with cold efficiency. Then one of them shouted, "He's bleeding! He won't last!" Reginald laughed, the sound sharp as a blade. "Good! Wing him! I want him alive long enough to watch me take his wife." Eli stepped out from behind the post, fury blazing through him. He fired point blank at the man who had shouted, sending him sprawling. But as he turned, another gunman rushed him from the side. Eli swung the rifle like a club, cracking the man across the jaw, but the distraction was enough. A third man tackled him from behind. Eli hit the snow hard, gasping as the air left his lungs. Two more men lunged, grabbing his arms, pinning him. Rose heard the struggle, heard Eli's grunt of pain, heard the thud of bodies in the snow. She didn't hesitate. She threw open the cabin door and stepped out, rifle aimed squarely at Reginald. "Let him go," she said, her voice shaking, but strong. Reginald blinked, startled. Then he smiled slowly, cruelly. "Ah, the bride emerges. I wondered how long it would take." He tilted his head. "Put the rifle down, Rose. Come here, and I'll let him live." "No," she said, just that one word. But behind it lay a lifetime of being dismissed, mocked, belittled, a lifetime of swallowing shame she never deserved. Reginald lifted his own pistol. "Put it down, or I kill him." Eli struggled against the men holding him. "Rose, don't you do it. Don't you dare." Tears burned her eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. She tightened her grip. "If you hurt him," she said, voice breaking but defiant, "you'll have to kill me next." Reginald's smile faded. Eli stared at her as though seeing her for the first time, truly seeing her strength, her courage, her heart. "Rose," he whispered. A crack split the air, a gunshot, sharp and sudden. Snow burst upward near Rose's boots. Reginald had fired. "Last warning," he hissed. Rose didn't back down. And in that fragile second, where her life hung suspended like breath in winter air, Eli moved. With a roar, he broke free from the grip of the stunned men, lunging toward Rose and shielding her with his own body as gunfire erupted in every direction. The world dissolved into smoke and thunder, and dawn bled red across the snow. Gunfire echoed across the valley, bouncing off the ancient granite walls of the Wyoming peaks as though the mountains themselves were judging every bullet. Eli felt the force of each shot rumble through his chest as he shielded Rose with his body, pulling her back toward the cabin. Snow exploded around them, turning to white mist under the heat of gunpowder. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the gunfire slowed, then halted. A single voice cut through the smoke. "Stone, enough blood's been spilled." Eli turned, panting, shoulder throbbing from where a bullet had grazed him earlier. The surviving hired guns were backing away, shaken by the sudden ferocity of the last exchange. 2 men lay bleeding in the snow. 3 more were dragging their wounded away. Reginald, pale and trembling with rage he could no longer disguise as confidence, sat rigid on his horse. "This isn't over," he snarled, but his voice cracked. Eli stepped forward, snow crunching under his boots. "It ends today." Reginald tried to lift his pistol, but his hand shook. The remaining men hesitated. They'd been paid to intimidate, not to die for him. And now they understood something dangerous. Eli Stone wasn't a rumor or a ghost or a wild tale whispered by saloon fires. He was a man who fought like he had nothing left to lose except the woman behind him. And men like that didn't lose. "Ride," Eli warned, voice low and cold as the mountain air, "while you still can." Reginald opened his mouth to argue, but the look in Eli's eyes stole the fight from him. With a curse, he tugged hard on the reins, turning the gelding sharply. The remaining riders followed, disappearing into the thinning veil of smoke and frost. Silence settled over the clearing. Rose finally exhaled, knees weakening. Eli caught her as she swayed, holding her close. "You're safe," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "You're safe now." Her voice broke. I thought I'd lose you." "You won't," he murmured. "Not as long as I'm breathing." They stayed like that for a long while, wrapped in falling snow and relief so heavy it felt like a physical weight lifting from their shoulders. When Rose finally stepped back, she cupped Eli's injured shoulder with trembling hands. "You're hurt." "I've had worse," he said gently. "Nothing a warm cabin and your care won't fix." Together they walked inside, closing the door against the cold wind and the world outside. Eli lowered himself near the hearth, while Rose gathered bandages and hot water. Her hands were steady now, practiced from weeks of caring for a man who lived more in the wilderness than among people. As she cleaned the wound, Eli watched her, not just with gratitude, but with awe. "You stood in front of him," he said quietly. Rose nodded, keeping her eyes on the bandage. "I couldn't let him take you. I couldn't let him win." "Rose," Eli whispered, "I've lived a long time thinking I'd never deserve anything good again. But you make me want to fight for something more than just survival." Her breath caught. "You don't have to fight alone." He took her hands in his, rough palms warming her fingers. "This is your home now, if you'll have it." Rose looked around the cabin, the flickering firelight, the sturdy log walls, the scent of pine and smoke, the steady presence of the man who had stepped into her life like a storm and become her shelter. Tears filled her eyes, soft and shining. "I already do," she whispered. "I already do." And as dawn finally broke over Redemption Springs, the mountains stood silent witness, not to violence, but to the fragile, fierce beginning of something worth protecting. Stories like this remind us how love often grows in the harshest places, across snowy valleys, inside quiet cabins, between people the world once overlooked. Rose and Eli found something rare in the wilderness, a belonging neither of them thought they deserved. If you're still listening, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? Which city? Which country? Your comments keep this channel alive and help these frontier tales travel farther than any horse could ride. And if you still believe that love can redeem even the most forgotten hearts, stay close. The next story is already on the horizon.